Summit just went live for everyone on Valorant today, so let's take a look at all of the agents in the game and give you an idea of which ones you should be playing versus avoiding. This will mostly come down to just how the utility fits the map, rather than just the best agents in the game right now. I will start with the controller class in general at first, and Clove is a good example of ignoring the meta and looking at how the abilities work on Summit. The map is pretty big, but it's not quite as offensive as Breeze, where it's impossible to smoke both sides. At the very least, you can play towards top mid here to reach A and B, or even if you play towards B link, you can still drop this sort of one way towards A. Still though, the reality is that Clove is just a ranked agent that don't really offer much in terms of stalling or information. If you're playing Clove, you're basically just Reyna with smokes, but still I think this is a mid-tier map for them. It's not as bad as say Breeze or Abyss, but there are better maps, like say Bind or Ascent. Mix is very similar to Clove in my mind, as they have the same limited range smokes, then the key difference is that Mix's kit is a lot more supportive rather than selfish. The only thing that is sort of map dependent otherwise is his ultimate. There are actually some pretty good aggressive defensive ults here if the enemy dares to rush main, and then from the attacker side of things, there are also some good ults where you can clear most of sight and also hit some of the closer angles as well. I still don't rate him too highly in the grand scheme of things, but there is definitely some merit to his base quake on this map. Brimstone is a sort of interesting one because his 3 smokes give him a unique advantage over say Omen, Clove or Mix. With all of those agents, I definitely recommend you don't smoke off this doorway. However, with Brim you can sort of afford to, since you still have 2 smokes however you want to use them for the site. Having said that, this still isn't a great Brim map in my mind because his design is a very rush heavy agent with his stim and non-rechargeable smokes, whereas the devs literally said you should not 5-man rush a site on this map, and instead you probably want to take it a little bit slower and get some mid control. That's not to say that Brimstone can't do that, but the other agents do it better. Viper is typically a pretty hit or miss agent whenever I do these types of videos, and so often she is going to be reliant on having a second controller. I do think she can sort of work on this map for ranked, but if you're playing alone you'll have a much easier time attacking A compared to B. And I still think in both cases you would rather traditional dome smokes instead of this rigid wall. Then for defending, a wall sort of like this to not only defend A but also lurk up mid could work, but in general I think I would not recommend playing Viper here as a solo controller. However, if you have 2 controllers, then you have a lot more room to get creative. Astra loves Valorant's bigger maps, and Summit is no exception. One key thing to her on this map is her ability to recall stars is pretty handy when it comes to allowing you to cross safely before breaking these panels and shutting the doors. I should have mentioned this in the intro, but this is going to be more of a solo queue tier list as opposed to higher level or pro play, so while in many cases people will simply opt for Omen rather than Astra, I do think this is one of her better maps. Omen feels really solid on Summit, and I think a lot of that comes down to the verticality, which he is able to play around with. For instance, if you don't close this door towards B, you are able to teleport up and get this unexpected angle on defender spawn. His range is sufficient to smoke both sides, even if you're leaning on one side of the map, and all across the map there are some great paranoia lines to blind multiple common angles. Similar to Astra, he also has the ability to safely cross the main and break the panel on both sides. Of course, you do still have to worry about being shot at, but this safe crossing isn't something that is possible for most of the other controllers. Harbor actually feels incredible to play on this map. His wall alone is all you need to take the sides in varying styles, which opens up your cove for just a default mid smoke, giving you additional map pressure. What's more is that his ultimate fits this map insanely well too. Taking B, you can see just how much it clears and where it ends up. Then towards A, it also ends up in some really useful places, whether you want to clear the left side or clear sight. Defensively, his range is more than enough to reach both sides unless you're playing especially deep on site, and in general I feel like I could do an entire video on how to utilize Harbor on Summit. His abilities just seem to fit this map really well. So those are all 7 of the controllers ranked against one another. Obviously, Clove and Mix are both just ranked agents that don't really care about what map they're being played on, but I would still personally avoid them in favor of agents like Astra or Harbor. Kicking off the initiators now, and up first I have Breach. While there are a few tight spaces on this map that he can do a good job of blowing up, I think information is too important on Summit to justify playing him here. Breach loves his fast executes, not to say that you can't do that on this map, but again, it is designed for you to slowly take space in mid as well as main, rather than just running it down onto sites. One thing I did notice is that you can use his aftershock to break the door on B and otherwise clear out this space, but I'm not sure how often you'd be doing that. Then the same thing goes for this door in mid as well. Summit is far from Breach's worst map, and if you like him then sure, play him here. I just think he's hard to justify over the other initiators with recon and drones. Tejo is similar to Breach in that he's more of a flushing initiator than anything else, but he does at the very least have his drone. I do think there are some fun plays you can go for if you hear teams running it down in either of the mains, but otherwise I think he lacks too much information. Already though, I will point out I think Tejo is fine on this map, and all of the other initiators from here on out are playable, some just feel better than others. Yoru, for example, is an agent who isn't very map dependent, and you can pretty much make him work anywhere. Defensively though, there are a lot of good knives you can get towards main to instantly get intel about how many enemies are going to be pushing. I'm sure I already sound like a broken record by this point, but the other initiators who have more information and can clear out more areas on this map are simply going to be stronger. Particularly in ranked where suppression isn't that good in the first place, I think there are plenty of better options to play rather than KO. Skye I think might actually be a little weak on this map compared to the others. While her flash gives her a good amount of general information, I think a lot of it on Summit is simply going to be too broad, especially considering the amount of tight angles and corners to clear out. She's still an excellent jack of all trades initiator with both a flash and drone, but I don't think she's the best option on Summit. I will make a point of saying though she's always going to be a really good choice if you're feeling in ranked and your team has no flash or drone just yet. Gekko fills a similar role to Skye, but I think he might actually do that same job a little bit better on Summit. The way mid especially is laid out allows you to clear one section at a time, then pick up his utility before moving on to the next area. I don't think it feels too dangerous to plant the spike on Summit, so it's not one of those maps where you desperately want Wingman to be planting the spike for you, but at the same time, that's always going to be handy to have. Especially in ranked, I think Gekko is a fun and rarely bad agent to play, and I think you'll enjoy playing him on this new map. It even turns out that his molly can break all 3 doors. This one towards B does make sense to me, especially if you make it land on the box, but the ones in A and mid just don't feel like they should be broken by this at all, so maybe that'll get fixed, but for now that's how it works. Fade feels amazing on this map, as her prowlers are able to clear a surprising amount of space. Take towards A for example, where as long as you have an eye to clear all of this back area, you can pretty quickly clear all of site with just the one prowler. B side is a little bit tougher, but you can easily clear a lot of space with just 2 pieces of util, and then towards mid, regardless of which side you're coming from, you can check for aggression in both lanes. To put it simply, because this map has so many corners and things to clear, the more recon the better, hence Fade placing so highly. Sova I do still have a tier above Fade though, and that comes down to 3 things. The first is the size of the overall map. Obviously Fade is relatively limited by range, and here she can struggle to safely get her eye all the way to the back of sight. On the other hand, Sova can create lineups from practically anywhere to get his dart into the perfect spot. Fade does have slightly better scouting ability with her whole kit, but I think Sova's drone can still do a good enough job here. My second point when it comes to these 2 initiators in particular is that I feel like Fade is easier to hop on and immediately get value. I would say she has a lower floor, but then I think Sova has a higher skill ceiling. So if someone's filling initiator, I would rather have them on Fade over Sova, but if I'm choosing between a master Fade or a master Sova, I'm always taking the Sova. One final point here is that you can use both of your shock darts to close the doors on Summit. Now, do I think you want to be doing this every single round? Probably not. But nonetheless, this gives him an interesting edge on this map over the other initiators. So with that being said, here is how I would rank the initiators overall. The more information the better, and even having said that, I don't think agents like Breach or Tejo are that bad as long as you're getting your information from somewhere else in the team comp. Deadlock kicks off our Sentinel section for this video, and I do think she's the weakest of the lot. While the main choke point areas are pretty restricted themselves, the areas immediately afterwards are open enough to the point that the sound sensors feel predictable and easy to avoid. Still, towards the B side, here's an example of a setup I made that I think feels pretty good. Ultimately though, I would say that Deadlock does not give enough information to be a good Sentinel on this map, especially in her current state. Veto did just receive some buffs, and I think he can be played in a pretty versatile way towards both sides. There are decent enough spots for his interceptor, and I particularly enjoy these types of setups where you aggressively take space in one of the mains, but then can rotate towards mid and throw a pretty far up trip to take space away from the enemy. Overall, I would say he doesn't quite provide enough information and lacks enough stopping power to be incredible on this map, but I think he does have a place here. Chamber is in a similar boat to Veto, where you can get the most out of their kits by fighting towards main and then falling back after getting a pick. This map doesn't really jump out to me as one where using the operator is particularly strong, because there aren't really too many crazy long sightlines. Having said that, there is a lot of verticality that you can play around with too, so I'm sure with his ultimate you'll find some success. It's also worth pointing out, and this goes for most of the Sentinels too, that setting up your flank watch is pretty simple on this map. The main flank is very easy to cover with a single trip, although you will have to be more mindful than normal of defenders flooding through from mid. Sage seems like a lot of fun on this map, and that isn't just because she used to train here. You've all already probably seen Grim himself coming up with some walls on this map, like especially that one in the door on B, but I think there's a lot of creative stuff you can do here with these smaller boxes. Outside of those tricks though, Sage isn't that bad of an agent, and you'll pretty often get guaranteed value out of slowing enemies down or healing your allies. Vyse, I think, is a good middle ground option for the Sentinels on Summit. It is a shame she no longer has that information gathering on her flash, because that would have been insanely valuable here. Nonetheless, her wall having no range limit is a nice touch, and it's not the worst idea to just leave it behind you as flank watch every round. She's got a good combination of information and stalling, so I think she's a solid pick for Summit. Killjoy has some pretty insane ultimates on this map, especially when you factor in how close to the site you can get with these doors closed. Even though this is a bigger map in the grand scheme of things, I don't think Killjoy suffers too much as a result of that compared to some of the bigger maps in the game. Especially after the recent buffs, she seems a little more threatening here, so Killjoy isn't incredible, but is probably one of the better options on Summit. Cypher might actually be the king on this map though, seeing as not only can he cover so much of the map at once with no range limits either, but he interacts with the doors in a pretty interesting way. I think caging main and breaking the panel is something you should always be doing, especially if you're on the opposite side of the map to your team, just to put more pressure on the enemy. There's also a really strong trip you can just put on B main here, and I even saw this camera that you can put way up in the sky. So for Summit, the Sentinels as a whole are a pretty interesting class. The only one I actually think is bad is Deadlock, and even she isn't that terrible. Cypher I did rate above the rest, but not by much since Killjoy and Vyse are both serviceable for information. Veto is fun and can cover a lot of ground, then of course neither Chamber or Sage are bad, and people will always play them in ranked regardless. Reyna kicks off our duelist class, but realistically there is almost nothing to be said about her. She is a simple and fun ranked agent who, regardless of the map, will either be lurking or running out main with a flash. Yoru feels a little rough on Summit to me due to some of the map geometry. Compared to say Corrode or Breeze, I don't think it's as easy to get those cross-map teleports, let alone when you factor in the dynamic nature of the doors as well. Combine that with his recent nerfs, and he's just not the same rotating beast that he used to be. Nonetheless, his ult is as strong as ever, and I think an underrated aspect towards A is that not only can he clear everything since the side is so small, but he can even ping the panel for his teammates. This might not be as necessary as players become more experienced on this map, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Waylay I don't think will find much success on Summit, mostly because I don't think she's self-sufficient enough. There were still a few things I found though, like you can use the saturate over the top onto A site, but even that one doesn't feel super safe to capitalize on. Towards B I like this execute, but it's only really going to work when you've got your ultimate. Maybe I'll end up eating my words here, but I don't think Waylay is that great on this map. ISO I actually think has more of an argument on Summit than you might expect. Particularly towards mid, I think just throwing a wall at the start of the round can go a long way to conditioning the enemy to be mindful of that space. Outside of that, there isn't a crazy amount that changes on a map by map basis for him. You will try and ult the Sentinel off site and try and hit multiple common angles with your undercut. Raze honestly only sneaks above those last two due to her boombot. I think her entry overall lacks too much safety, even if she has the firepower to make up for it. Yeah, the boombot is going to be especially handy on Summit. I like this angle towards the A site to clear out close, but you can also use it to clear out all of sight. My satchels are terrible, so I'm not even going to pretend to try and show you how you could path, but I'm sure there are some solid options. Phoenix has a surprising amount of value on this map, particularly towards the A sides. This orb is relatively safe to grab, which he of course loves, and then you've got multiple options for your wall, whether it's to safely cross into sight, or even block off this angle in mid. Then his molly is pretty easy to get behind this box, and in general you'll be able to find a lot of value out of that ability here. I also noticed that towards A, not only is this wall just solid to get out onto the site with, but it gets double value by breaking some of those close Cypher trips. Jett gets a lot of value out of the verticality on Summit. I know Waylay can get access to some of that too, but you just can't utilize it in the same fashion. Beyond that, there's obviously going to be this gimmick of updrafting and knifing people through the door windows, and Jett is also going to be one of those agents that can provide cover for themselves to quickly break the door panels. I also think that Jett has some solid entry pathing with her smokes here, and all in all, this seems like a pretty good map for her. Neon I do have as the best duelist on Summit, and that is mostly thanks to her sprint and her wall. She's able to split the side up in really effective ways, and then even her stun, you're pretty consistently able to get landing in two spots that the enemies would be sitting. On top of that, her sprint enables her to rotate really fast, which obviously is useful on such a big map. I really love this wall towards A on her because you can pop out of it from so many places, depending on what your plan is for that round and what information you have. That is how I would place the duelists overall. You could probably bump Waylay up a tier, but otherwise I think this is pretty accurate. Although I will mention I don't think Neon is that much better than Jett. I just wanted to have at least one of each role in the S tier. That means my overall tier list for Summit looks something like this. I think the best agents here are the ones that either have a lot of recon or have a lot of ways to deny that information from the enemy. At the end of the day though, play whatever agents you enjoy and are comfortable on, but these are some of the ones that I think fit this new map the best.